Alright, so it's that time again. Today we're gonna be discussing the most recent balance update that Blizzard is planning on pushing live for the multiplayer version of StarCraft 2. Now, in case you have one of those face masks or maybe even like a full hazmat suit, it might be wise to put one on because generally speaking right now, I think that the comment section of this video is gonna be included as well, but generally speaking, the StarCraft 2 community right now is a little bit divided, and I've noticed that the StarCraft Reddit as well as the forums are a bit of a war zone. A lot of people are big fans of this patch, a lot of people absolutely hate it. Now in this video, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts. We're going to be reading through this entire post. I haven't read all of the reasonings yet, but I have looked at the changes, and I have given myself a couple of hours to think about it and to also form my opinion on a lot of these changes. Now, first off, before we actually discuss balance, I think it might be good to set a bit of a baseline. So here's the thing, whenever you judge balance by your own experiences playing the game, it's usually not that great. I mean, we have the tendency to judge others by their actions and ourselves by our intentions, right? So generally speaking, say you like play Terran, you think Protoss and Zerg are overpowered. And if you play Zerg, Protoss and Terran are overpowered. And likewise, if you play Protoss, Terran and Zerg are clearly the OP ones. Now, if you watch pro games, you might be able to form a little bit more of an objective, I guess, opinion on the current state of balance, but let's just look at the numbers. So here's the current situation we find in. This is the current list of the strongest StarCraft 2 players on Aligolek. And Aligolek, for those of you unfamiliar, it's a statistics website that keeps track of all of the different games that are being played, both online and offline. Now, one thing you may notice over here is that in the top 10, there's not a single Protoss. Right? So there's a lot of Zergs, there's a lot of Terrans, but the Protosses in general are lacking a little bit behind. Now, is that because they are weaker players? Is that because of the fact that Terran and Zerg players are just simply better at the game? I'm not entirely convinced that that is the case. Secondly, let's look at the premier tournaments that have been played and have been won by players recently. So these are, this is a page on Liquipedia for all of the premier tournaments that have been played in Legacy of the Void so far. Actually, I think it includes the entire game. But long story short, you will see a very similar situation right over here. We have Terran, Zerg, well, Team Finland, which basically was Team Serral, so also Zerg, Jin Green Wings. I believe that this one was carried primarily by Maru, who's a Terran player, Serral, and then the most recent victory by a Protoss player was Stats back in August 2019. But before that, I mean, basically, well, I mean, I feel like I'm repeating myself already, but basically what it comes down to is that Protoss is falling a little bit behind, and Zerg seems to be dominating. The last patch that I also, or the last page rather, that I also want to show you before we actually start reading the actual blog post is this one right over here. This is once again on Aligolek 2, and this is a balance report. So you can see over time here how the different matchups have performed balance-wise. So obviously the mirror matchups, TVT, PvP, and ZVZ are not included in this because, well, I mean, in a Zerg versus Zerg, there's always a Zerg player that wins and always one that loses, right? So those are by default 50%. The goal is to balance the game and to make sure that all of the matchups are ideally at 50% win rate, right? So both races have an even chance at winning. So the most interesting information we have right now, I think, is the very final bit of info. Since this is late April currently, the stats for April are not in here yet, but it will give us at least a decent guideline. So Terran versus Zerg currently, well, about 50.39% in favor of Zerg. Protoss versus Terran, you can see, is pretty much 50-50 as well. I mean, you're never going to be able to balance it perfectly. And Protoss versus Zerg is definitely a little bit in favor of the Zerg. So at 47% of the games, or in 47% of the games rather, Protoss is the one that ends up winning. And obviously, these are games that are played at the highest level, right? So actual professional games of actual tournament matches. That's one other thing that we have to discuss probably. StarCraft 2 is balanced from the top down. So what that means is that the game is balanced around the pro level. It's not balanced around people that play on the ladder. It's not balanced around Gold League. It's not balanced around Grandmaster League. It's balanced around the pro gamer level. And that's really quite important because while you might be struggling in like Silver League dealing with a certain unit composition, that does not automatically mean that you know, is going to be an imbalanced army to actually have to deal with. And I think this is a good thing. Now, there are a couple of nuances here that I do want to get into as well, but before I blabber on let's actually have a look at what Blizzard wrote here. All right, so First and foremost, we hope everyone is staying safe in these unprecedented times. While we've been hunkered down and large-scale live events have been temporarily halted, we've been very fortunate that the community's content creators have stepped up to provide us with seemingly endless amount of StarCraft. Hey, I think that includes myself. Anyways, we're always thankful for your passion and creativity. With that said, we wanted to take this time to provide an update on our current thoughts about the state of the game, as well as our plans for the next balance test mode. Okay, so Terran versus Zerg. Though we had concerns with Terran versus Zerg in last season's map pool, considering the current maps, the matchup looks healthy both from a gameplay and a balance perspective. After last year's big patch, which was back in November, and this was a very significant patch, basically the TLDR of that patch was that Zerg got nerfed, and after that we also saw the new balance, or rather the new ladder season a couple of weeks ago, that also nerfed Zerg quite a bit in the sense that the map are significantly worse to play on. So I do feel like we're already like approaching a bit more of like a 50-50, which you can probably see in the next update of the balance report once it is available. But anyways, we saw a steep rise in mech strategies followed by a steep decline. Though bio is still the most prominent strategy for Terran, we're seeing a slight resurgence in mech in recent months, possibly inspired by some of the new maps. From the Zerg side, mid-game strategies seem very diverse as well, but perhaps most notably, endgame seems to have improved drastically, with Brute Lord turtling seeming like a thing of the past in scenarios where both sides fight tooth and nail for small pieces of territory are commonplace. I 100% agree with this. I think Terran versus Zerg right now is in an amazing spot. Best matchup, bar none, in StarCraft 2. A lot of variety in mid-game, a lot of variety in late-game. And, I mean, if you've been watching some of the games that I've posted over the last few weeks, you're probably going to agree with me on that one. TVZ seems really, really good. Terran versus Protoss. While we view TVP to be relatively even and games tend to end less abruptly than last year, we still believe there's room for improvement for this matchup in terms of design. For instance, even though we're seeing fewer games that end abruptly with 2-base tank pushes, a lot of the mid-game gameplay still centers around the threat of this type of push, which tends to lead to one-dimensional mid-games. Exactly, yes. Any significant changes we'd want to make to impact this matchup would primarily have the goal of opening this up rather than trying... Oh, a little bit of a typo there. I guess the editor is also working from home, but anyways, to balance it. Yeah, so obviously Terran versus Protoss, I mean, it is looking much better. I wish it was as complex as Terran versus Zerg, but Terran versus Protoss certainly has looked quite a bit better. I don't really like the fact how reliant Protoss seems to be on splash damage, especially towards the later stages of the game, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Zerg versus Protoss. Now, this is the matchup that most people are discussing right now. First, the good news. We're seeing a ton of diversity from both sides in the early and mid-game stages of this matchup. From Protoss side, we're seeing many varied openers and small refinements to those openers. From the Zerg side, we're seeing greater diversity in mid-game unit composition than we've possibly ever seen in the history of StarCraft 2. However, we do view this matchup as favoring Zerg, especially in the late game, as evidenced by the lack of late-game PvZ play in the recent months. And after talking to professional level Protosses, we've identified the most common threats in their complaints about this. Okay, this is always a little bit funny though. Like I said, right, the grass is always greener on the other side. If you ask a Terran player what they think of the game, they will probably think their opponents are too powerful, and I'm sure that Protoss players think likewise as well. So they say the effectiveness of the Queen in defending early game pressure is too good, the efficiency of the Baneling, inability of clearing creep throughout the mid to late game, and the difficulty of late game with a focus on the risk versus reward of abduct/feedback interaction. Okay, so here's my main problem with Zerg versus Protoss, and it's a couple of things. First off, yes, Protoss has many different ways of opening up, be it Twilight Council, be it Robotics, be it Stargate. But all of the roads that Protoss take basically leads towards an Archon Immortal mid-game. It is by far the most common unit composition, and it's also like the most powerful unit composition that Protoss can go for. There are some varieties, especially on the ladder, where people open up like, say, Stalker Colossus, or people go like double Stargate. But at the tippity top of the skill level, I mean, players like Serral just don't lose against that kind of approach. So usually all of the roads seem to lead towards that Archon Immortal style. Secondly, and this is a big thing as well, for most of us that play on the ladder, for most of us that are like below the top 25 in the world, we probably struggle against a maxed out Skytol's army. So say you have the perfect unit composition of Protoss units. Say you have like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 Archons, like 10 carriers, a bunch of Tempests, maybe a couple of Void Rays, obviously High Templar and a Mothership, right? Like you have that really strong, very powerful unit composition. Here's the problem with that unit composition. The average Diamond League player can probably control that army as well as like one of the strongest Protoss players in the world, right? Now, obviously, the best Protoss player in the world is going to be able to micro it a little bit better, and they're going to be able to choose their engagements a little bit better. But the micro ability, I suppose, of that unit composition is not that great, right? Now, if you compare that to, say, like a maxed out Zerg ultimate unit composition, we're talking about like Corruptor, Brute Lord, Viper, Infestor, Spore Crawlers, probably some static defense, maybe some Queens, and then like Hydras lurk. Like, basically, you have a very complex unit composition that can be microed infinitely. And despite me being pretty decent at the game, Serral is going to outperform me every single time when it comes to controlling that unit comp, right? I think those are like two really big things. So first off, the fact that like the late game Protoss army is mostly just attack move and storm, right? And then secondly, the fact that the mid game unit compositions for Protoss are very, very limiting. So despite them saying here that they quite like it, I mean, I don't think I like the mid-game stage of Zerg versus Protoss at all. I actually disagree with this. At least at like the tippity top of the skill level. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to that maxed out Skytools army, the top level Protoss, or the top level Zerg players rather, they absolutely smash it. It's not even close. I've seen, like, for example, Dark, Raynor, Serral, like those top dogs. I've seen them face off against Protoss maxed out Skytools armies, and they make it look super easy and very, very straightforward. The thing is, most of us that play on the ladder, so below, like, the top 25 in the world, most of us probably die to that maxed out Skytools. So it's a bit of a weird situation to be in, because I genuinely think if you're like say like you're a diamond level Zerg player, and you're going up against a maxed out Protoss Skytools army of a player who's also in Diamond League, I don't think you're going to be able to stop that army. Like, you may try, you may get a good engagement, but that late game control is very limited by Protoss, and it's very hard to control as Zerg. So I wish, and I guess this is already like one of my suggestions here, I wish that there was more micro ability in that late game Protoss army that would actually allow the best players to separate themselves from, like, you know, players that are less than that. Okay, Terran versus Terran and Zerg versus Zerg. We feel both of these matchups of being in a good place. Yes. Terran versus Terran especially notable for having a slightly more dynamic games compared to last year. Yeah. Terran versus Terran is amazing. I think it's actually significantly more dynamic. But anyways, yeah, Terran versus Terran is awesome. Zerg versus Zerg also in a very good spot right now. Protoss versus Protoss. Now, Protoss versus Protoss is in a bit of a meme right now because generally speaking, it's all about, like, I haven't cast a lot of PvPs recently because honestly, the matchup kind of sucks. There's a lot of cheeses happening, a lot of proxies. Like Proxy Stargate, for example, is oftentimes considered to be a macro build. Like, the matchup is kind of a meme. But anyways, so we believe PvP has two core issues: the volatility of early game and resulting difficulty of holding a natural expansion, the difficulty of holding a third. Ever since the removal of the Mothership Core and its replacement with the Shield Battery, we've run into some stability issues for Protoss versus Protoss. From what we've gathered, the current general understanding of early game seems to be that Proxy Robo facilities built an extremely strong, builds are extremely strong in the matchup to the point of over-centralizing the metagame. This build is also a large part of why holding a natural expansion is so difficult and the resulting games seem to be so volatile. Another prevalent concern is the ability for Protoss to hold 3 bases. In the past, when the key heavy hitters in PvP were Colossi and Disruptors, the defenders had a significant advantage in that they would generally have 1 or 2 additional Colossi or Disruptors in their defense due to the travel distance. But now that Zealots and Archons are primary mid-game units, while Immortals being much less potent than either Colossi or Disruptors, the travel distance is negated and the defender often can make up this difference when slightly behind. Okay, yes. With all of the thoughts in mind, here are some of the changes we'll be featuring in the next balanced test mod to be potentially added in the live game in a future patch. Okay, so real quick, as you guys know, I do play random. I'm currently Master 1 as random, so I'm pretty good at playing all 3 races, but I do primarily play Zerg. I try and be very objectively here, but just, you know, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I am, you know, a Zerg player at heart. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit biased. I plan not to be, but just so you know, I might be a little bit. Yeah, I guess we all try our best to be objective, right? But if you actually play the game and you see the matchups primarily from one side, you're bound to get a little bit biased and, you know, you might be leaning in one direction or the other. But I'll try and be very objective here. So, first off, Terran Widowmine. Drilling Claws upgrade no longer grants Widowmine's invisibility. Instead, the existence of an armory will now grant Widowmine's invisibility. The red laser attachment for Widow Mines will now communicate the existence of an armory instead of the existence of the drilling class upgrade. Okay, so previously, in order to get that invisibility, you needed to get a factory with a tech lab, and then the tech lab has to research drilling claws, and then your Widow Mines would be invisible. Right now, just like with the Hellion into Hellbat transformation, just having an armory apparently is going to be enough. So Terran players often talk about feeling economically behind, especially in the Terran versus Protoss matchup. While we are open to making changes to the Terran economy, a blanket buff is not something we're currently looking for, considering the state of Terran versus Zerg. So this is the thing, right? Whenever you like balance one matchup, you always got to keep the other one in mind as well. So any changes you make to the Widow Mine are not just going to affect Terran versus Protoss, they will also affect Terran versus Zerg, but probably to a lesser extent. Though Terran versus Protoss economy is a complicated issue, we believe the primary reasons for Terran feeling behind in this matchup are changes made in the transition from Heart of the Swarm to Legacy of the Void, which is like 5 years ago. Some key ones include changes to Chrono Boost / Mules and Widow Mines revealing themselves after detonating, thus reducing the importance of early game detection, which allows Protoss players to take a third earlier and more easily. With that line of thinking and TVP in mind, we're looking to make this change for the following reasons. To encourage a more dynamic gameplay in TVP, firstly, we believe Widow Mines naturally lend themselves to more multi-pronged tactics and drop play over siege tank counterparts. In addition, because of the increased strain placed on observer positioning, we believe this change will create more openings for Terrans to drop in general. To put indirect economic pressure on Protoss by increasing the number of potential Terran openers and putting strain on their defenses across multiple bases, we believe this change could encourage more thoughtful positioning of Stalkers as well as force earlier photon cannons, both of which distract from the power of Protoss' primary army to help ease the transition to 2-2 infantry units. Okay. So I don't mind this change whatsoever for the mid game. I think for the mid game it makes a lot of sense. It kind of feels similar to like moving some of the upgrades towards the fusion core. Is it a fusion core or is it the other one? I always like mix the two. But anyways, like they did pretty recently where you can just like transition a little bit smoother to watch Mass Liberator play, right? You don't need to get that tech lab anymore on what's it called? Like on the starport in order to actually like research the advanced ballistics upgrade. Anyways, this kind of feels similar to me. You can just smoothly transition towards that Widow Mine mid game, right? My main concern is with timing attacks. So this will increase the diversity of build orders that Terran can go for off of 1-1-1. And I don't really know exactly if Terran needs more variety in the early game because it feels like they can already throw 20 different builds, you know, at you. And I'm also a little bit concerned because with the most recent balance patch back in November, the observer speed got nerfed for absolutely no apparent reason. I really still do not know why that happened. Apparently someone on the forums made like a long post why that needed to happen and then they nerfed observer speed. I think if they're going to encourage this, they might want to bring the observer speed back. I think that would be very reasonable, and I can't really come up with any reason why that wouldn't be a good idea. Okay, so those are the only changes right now for Terran. Now, mind you, this is certainly a buff, but I think the other changes are going to be significant buffs to Terran as well. So, when it comes to Zerg, here we go. There's two very significant ones, and those are already on the screen right now. We first off have the Queen. Anti-air weapon range decreased from 8 to 7. So, this will be the anti-air range of the Queen, right? So usually right now they can shoot away a lot of stuff. Anyways, the Queen's increased anti-air range was introduced at a point in the game when defending both Liberators and ranged upgrade Liberators were a concern in the early game. But with both map design tightening up to account for Liberators and ranged upgraded Liberators receiving -1 range, now might be a good time to revert this change to a more to empower a early game air harassment from other races. Yes. So our biggest concern is how instrumental large numbers of Queens typically are at dealing with battlecruiser openers, which did not exist in the past. However, if this becomes an issue, our current thinking is that we prefer to address it from the battlecruiser side than the Queen side. Okay, so this nerf over here is very significant. This will not only affect battlecruiser openers, it will affect all air units. So obviously getting rid of like a war prism inside of the main is going to be significantly harder. Getting rid of like, and basically punishing mistakes, I suppose, will be significantly harder as well. We see air units in pretty much all matchups right now. And while battlecruiser openers are not as popular as they were a couple of months ago, I feel like this is going to like create a massive resurgence. And the reason why I'm a little bit concerned is because of the next upgrade right over here as well, or the next nerf rather right over here as well. So currently, Centrifugal Hooks grants Baneling, so that's the Baneling speed upgrade, 5 health. Centrifugal hooks cost decreased from 150 to, 150 to 100, and the centrifugal hook upgrade obviously no longer grants those 5 hit points. Similarly, Banelings originally gained plus 5 hit points at a time where Zerg were struggling in the mid-game. Fast forward to today, where the most common piece of feedback we receive from both Terran and Protoss player is the strength of the Baneling in a variety of roles. Internally, we considered a variety of options to adjust either the Baneling or the units that interact with the Baneling in a more targeted way, but because the feedback that we received was that the Baneling was generally too strong, we decided to take a more generalized approach. In initial feedback from professional players, a concern brought up was the difficulty of holding onto 4th bases against a 3-base Terran Biopus with this change, as the feedback surrounding Baneling centers around their strength over the course of a long game rather than the initial power spike. We'd like to try decreasing centrifugal hooks' cost to mitigate this concern. Okay, so honestly, this is a band-aid right over here, right? Like, yeah, this is gonna like make it a little bit easier to transition towards upgrades, to maybe like get yourself those 1-1 upgrades going a little bit faster, to get maybe the Overseer Scout in a little bit quicker, to allow yourself to like get your Hydro Den or maybe your Spire going a little bit quicker as well. But this right over here is the real nerf. I don't think this one is as significant as they're making it out to be, to like, you know, I don't think like those 2 Banelings you gain from this are going to make it much easier to hold on to the 4th base. I don't think that's really going to make much of a difference. This right over here, though, is going to be absolutely huge. So I agree with this change as far as the Zerg versus Protoss matchup goes, because there's no denying that against Protoss right now. I mean, Protoss needs a little bit of help, be it with a buff on the Protoss side of things or be it with a nerf on the Zerg side of things. The thing is, this will, so the main thing that this helps out with as far as like Protoss goes, they don't really gain any like value from like Immortal hits or Stalker hits or anything like that. All of those will like remain the same. I think it's like 2 hits from an Immortal to kill 1 Baneling, and whether or not it has 5 health more or less doesn't really matter. That's still going to be the same amount. The main thing that really changes here is the damage of Psionic Storm. So Psionic Storm will have an easier time killing Banelings. That's the big thing. I don't mind that. I think that's pretty cool. My main concern is how this will affect the Terran versus Zerg matchup. So I think this is a cool change when it comes to like discussing Terran versus or Protoss versus Zerg, but I don't really like it for Terran versus Zerg. What I can imagine with these 2 things right over here, right? So the Queen anti-air weapon range decrease as well as the Baneling decrease. I've got a feeling that after this patch, a lot of Terran players will start opening up with battle cruisers first and then transition towards bio, which already is a very powerful strategy and already a very popular build to go for, and that strategy will basically become stronger. So I'm a little bit concerned that this might mean that, yeah, Terran is going to absolutely start smashing, especially in the mid game, because of like the more resources that Zerg needs to like invest into the early game to actually deal with those kind of battlecruiser openers. And then obviously the weakness of the Baneling in the mid game. Like they're obviously still going to be very strong, but I'm not entirely sure whether or not this is, you know, going to be balanced. I'm a little bit concerned that this might be a bit too much and might give Terran quite a significant upper hand, especially at the pro level. Also considering that Widowmine change that we saw earlier. And then also one right over here that I also want to point out called the Creep Tumor. So we'll read the Infestor one here in a second because it's kind of separate. Creep Tumor, it's no longer armored, it's going to be light instead. So light means that units like Hellions, like Adepts, will be able to deal bonus damage to it. Now, this experimental change is intended to promote interactivity with Creep. It targets Adepts, Oracles, and Hellions and puts greater importance on the Zerg to defend their Creep Tumors. This is one of the changes we're more interested in feedback for, and we're especially curious as to how much this would impact the creep clearing minigame of Terran and Protoss. So here's the thing. Once again, this would be cool if it was only the Protoss versus Zerg matchup, because then Adepts would have an easier time cleaning this up. But Protoss does not have a creep clearing squad in the mid game. You can't just like throw away 4 Hellions, or rather 4 Adepts to clear out some of that creep. It's just not a good strategy because you end up getting surrounded and lose all of those. On the flip side, Terran obviously has those Hellions in the early game, and they will be actively trying to deny that creep spread. So I feel like, yeah, these changes, they make a lot of sense for the Zerg versus Protoss matchup, but in reality, this is buffing Terran versus Zerg way more than it is buffing Protoss versus Zerg, because a bunch of the changes really do not affect the way that like Protoss interacts with Zerg whatsoever. So those are my main 2 concerns over here. Yeah, these changes will help Protoss versus Zerg, but I'm a little bit concerned that this might help Terran a little bit more so than intended, because I think that like since Zerg will probably have to get like an additional 2 queens or so in the early game in order to make up for the weapon range reduction, as well as the lost creep tumors. Obviously, the transition towards the mid game will be harder, so that's probably where those resources will be spent instead. At that point, Zerg is going to have a hard time holding on towards a 4th base, and then on top of that, the mid game is going to be much harder to play because Banelings will be weaker. Obviously, like I'm making this video before actually, trying out any of these changes and before like seeing any of the pro gamers practice with these kind of changes as well. But I do feel like this might be a little bit much, and I really feel like this helps out Terran significantly more so than it helps out Protoss. Now, there's one more band-aid over here as well, the Infestor. Microbial Shroud no longer requires an upgrade. So, you may remember, back in November, they removed the Infested Terran off of the Infestor, and they added Microbial Shroud instead. Microbial Shroud is probably it's not probably, it's the worst upgrade in the game, it's the worst ability in the game. So in general, when trying to craft novel abilities, we tried to tune them towards being more powerful. However, with the perception of Zerg last year, we tried to be more careful. This change is one further step we'd like to take towards an ungating the power behind Microbial Shroud, and we're open to future. Okay, hold up. Okay, so real quick, right? Microbial Shroud. Let's go back to the drawing board here for a second. Microbial Shroud is... Okay, here's what it does. You throw it on your own units, and those units that are underneath the Microbial Shroud will now receive 50 less damage from air, right? So this was done specifically to address the Zerg versus Protoss Death Ball late game. Here's the thing. When it comes to affecting anti-air, the only units that are affected by that really are obviously the Hydralisk and the Queen, right? Because those are the only air to or only ground to air units that Zerg has. It does not affect air, so Corruptors don't benefit from this, and obviously the other units, you're not really going to be making those against the Skytol's army. So yeah, you can throw it on roaches, and then they will die less slowly to Void Rays. Whoop-de-doo. Here's the thing. Hydras and Queens already beat a maxed out Skytol's army straight up as it is, without Microbial Shroud. The reason why those units die is not because of the Stargate units, it's because of Psionic Storm. So Psionic Storm absolutely melts Hydralisks, and in a way, whenever you see the Microbial Shroud going down, hypothetically, because I have never actually seen anyone like go for this, it sucks. Like I've tried it a couple times myself, and it's just terrible. It just sort of like creates a hit marker because you throw up the Microbial Shroud. It's like an orange little cloud that appears on the map, and then Protoss know exactly where those Hydras are gonna hide so that it can just storm right where the Microbial Shroud is. And since Microbial Shroud does not affect spells, it doesn't really matter, right? So right now, the upgrade no longer is required. You can now make Microbial Shroud for free, I guess. You can cast it for free. I feel like I'd rather have it behind an upgrade so I can't accidentally use it and waste 50 energy or 75 energy even on my Infestors. It's just really bad. Like, the duration is too short, the cost is too expensive, and, I mean, you need it to go all the way up towards a Hive. I'm assuming that's still the case in order to get it right now, but honestly, I don't really see this being used. I would like to be wrong. Maybe it will actually be used against battle cruisers more so than against Protoss Sky. Which I wouldn't be all too surprised by, but honestly, man, like, I kind of feel like they need to just get rid of Microbial Shroud, leave the Infestor with 2 spells as it is, and you know what? I would love if they decided to add in another anti-air unit for Zerg. So, for my sake, they can remove the Infestor altogether. I don't really care very much. I would love to have Scourge. I've been saying this for years, but I would love to have Scourge. More, like, Zerg really has only one viable unit for anti-air, and that's the Corruptor. That's like the only real good anti-air unit that you have. I would love to see, like, Scourge. That'd be fun. That'd be really fun. Yeah. I don't know. I've been shouting about this for years, but at this point, I don't think it's ever going to happen anywhere. So I'm a little bit concerned about these changes. Now, once again, I'm a Zerg player at heart, so maybe I'm a little bit... I'm not being objective over here. I'm being a little bit subjective to these changes, but I think this might be... It might be good for Protoss versus Zerg, but it's really good for Terran versus Zerg. And since we just saw with the balance report already, right, that Terran versus Zerg is pretty much 50-50, I am a little bit concerned that this is going to lead towards Terran versus Zerg being like 53%, and maybe Protoss versus Zerg going to be at like 49% or something like that. Because I think it's going to help out Terran a lot more than it will help out Protoss. Okay, so there's also a couple of changes to Protoss that I also don't like very much. The there's Protoss a new Nexus ability called Battery Overcharge. This one, yeah, I don't know. So it's a new ability on the Nexus called Battery Overcharge. This overcharges a target shield battery, increases its shield restoration rate by 100%, and causing it to regenerate 100 energy over 21 seconds, and this costs 75 energy. So basically you can use this together with like Recall and then also Chrono Boost on the Nexus, right? So this addition is intended to generally reinforce Protoss defenders' advantage and help Protoss players stabilize in PvP, both on 2 bases and 3 bases. The initial number of this ability were specifically designed with PvP and proxy robotic builds in mind, and a testament to the strength of this ability, a Stalker being restored by an overcharged battery will often survive over 7 volleys from a typical 4 Stalker, 1 Immortal Poke off of proxy robos. Okay, so this is cool and all, but Protoss players never have 75 energy lying around in Protoss versus Protoss. I think in most situations, even when you see the proxy coming, if you happen to have 75 energy, you'd probably rather use it on getting an additional unit out yourself, so actually chrono boosting your structures. I don't really see this happening very much, because, I mean, you can always just target fire down the shield battery that's being overcharged, right? Like, Immortals do a ton of damage, especially to structures. So, I don't really see this being that significant of a deal. I mean, we can read all of this, but I honestly don't really see anyone using this anytime soon. Also, because, like, say you have, like, a hotkey of both of your Nexi, right? So you have, like, 2 bases. You have your hotkey for both of the Nexus. If you chrono boost something, it picks one of the 2 Nexi, right? So say you see, like, an army coming up. Since it's only 8 range, you have to have energy on the Nexus in the natural. So if you accidentally chrono boosted with the one in the natural and the main Nexus has 75 energy instead, you're not going to be able to, like, I don't see anyone actually using this. I don't think it's going to be very helpful at all. If anything, this reinforces Protoss to turtle more in the other matchups, where, like, maybe, like, the 3rd and the 4th base will have additional energy, because, like, macro obviously becomes a little bit less smooth, especially towards the later stages of the game. So say there's going to be, like, a, I don't know, like a Marine drop or a Zergling run by or so, Protoss can quickly overcharge a bunch of batteries, and then those drops don't do anything anymore. It kind of, like, encourages more, like, defensive turtley play. Not a fan. I'm not a fan. Oracle. So Revelation energy costs are decreased from 50 to 25. Revelation cooldown increased from 2 seconds to 10 seconds. Revelation duration decreased from 30 to 15. Okay, so this is primarily, I think, as far as creep tumors go, right? Yeah, so this redesign of the Revelation ability is intended to grant improved utility of clearing creep tumors. There are many subtle implications with this redesign, but a key one we'll be looking out for is how much of an effective Revelation will be at detecting Widowmines, Banshees, and Dark Templar. Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. I think in general, honestly, Protoss lacks vision. I wish there was more vision for Protoss. For those of you that, like, play primarily Terran and Zerg, I would like you to give Protoss a try, and you'll notice how blind you are. You're really super dependent on Revelation and Observers, and Observers are kind of shaky. They cost supply, they're kind of slow, they don't grant that much vision, and obviously they also take up production time in the Robo facility. I would rather see a buff to the Observer than a change to Revelation, although I don't mind this idea. It's a cool idea for sure. But yeah, once again, this is primarily to talk about Protoss versus Terran. And I guess it might be helpful against, like, the new Widowmine builds that Terrans are probably going to be going for. So that is to be seen. Now, here's a final one as well. And I know I'm sounding like a negative Nancy here, but I'm not a fan of this change either. High Templar feedback range increased from 9 to 10. When we ask professional level Protoss players why they're reluctant to go into the late game, the most common response is that feedback abduct interaction currently favors Zerg. We believe increasing feedback range to 10 is the healthiest way to balance out this interaction, as it would allow High Templar to be more effectively zoning Vipers, whose abduct range is 9. In the past, we would have been cautious about bringing feedback range closer to EMP range, but with the enhanced shockwaves upgrade, which they added a while ago, that's on the Ghosts, we feel more comfortable making this change. When this post goes live, the balance test mod has been updated with these changes. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and watching the resulting games that are played. As always, keep in mind that these changes are subject to change before they hit the ladder. I already kind of feel, like I was talking about earlier, right, that the late game Protoss army is not very microable at all. And you're very, very dependent on your Psionic Storms and your High Templar in general. Since that is the one unit that you're forced to micro a lot in the late game, I feel like this is going to put even more emphasis on the High Templar. It's going to create even more focus on splash damage for Protoss, because they will now have to go High Templar. I guess they already do, but I'm not a fan. I feel like... So there's a lot of cases, right, where we like see 3-base Terran or 4-base Terran versus like 3-4-base Protoss. And Protoss can never win any of those fights unless they are significantly ahead without splash damage. And I don't know if splash damage is necessarily the way to go, and I don't know if like having additional value on the High Templar is necessarily the way to go either. I'm a little bit hesitant about those changes too, because I am not the biggest fan of putting even more strain on a unit that is already so critical, as it like, yeah, it would just create more of an emphasis on that one unit. And if you make one little slip up over there, I wish instead there was more micro ability on carriers. I wish carriers were worse if you just attack move them, and better if you actually microed them. So I don't really have a suggestion. I wish I had the magical answer to like making this interaction more interesting. But I wish there was a way to like make Infestor, or say like, sorry, carriers significantly more powerful by microing them well, and significantly weaker when you don't micro them. Then it might actually create some really fun and interesting situations. Because then there's actually some sort of counterplay happening, and it actually comes down to skill, rather than just like landing your sonic storms and your feedbacks. Here's the thing. If you change anything whatsoever, and you buff any other things for Protoss, and this is, I guess, the main problem, Protoss very quickly goes straight towards like that turtle Protoss style, where they're basically sitting back for like 20 minutes. They make their perfect unit composition if you buff their late game too much. And likewise, if you, say, like, buff Zealots or something, or you make them deal damage again on charge impact, I feel like Protoss is once again going to be going for a lot of, like, 2 or 3-base all-ins. So I wish I had, like, a solution or an answer that would make that interaction more interesting. But in general, I really... Yeah, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan, and I'm not sure exactly what the answer would be, because it feels like any change you would make would very quickly go towards, like, Extreme Turtle or Extreme All-In. And I kind of feel like that's not so much a balance issue. I think that's mostly a game design issue. Although, I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts down below in the comment section of this video. What do you think? Do you have any suggestions? Blizzard, of course, does want to hear your feedback as well. So if you have any feedback, definitely let me know down below in the comment section. Maybe you have like a great idea that would solve a lot of these problems that I've discussed here. I would love to read it. I can certainly forward them to Blizzard as well if I like one a lot. So maybe, yeah, maybe we can figure out something to make the game even better together. Anyways, for now, I want to very much so thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Don't forget to smile. And I'll see you once again in the next one.